All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started here in just a minute. We're giving a quick minute to let people get from the waiting room here into the webinar. So that should take just a quick minute, but we're going to start here in just a minute. Welcome, everyone. All right, looks like everybody is coming on in. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Charlotte Inno's virtual State of Innovation event on the future of work. Today, I think this is an especially fascinating topic because so much of what we think of as work, where we work, how we interact with others at work, all of that has really been turned on its head because of this whole pandemic. And a lot of people are asking, what does the future of work look like in this, pandemic, post-pandemic world? And so we have with us today an amazing panel of experts to speak on this theme from various perspectives, including commercial real estate, office space design, co-working, tech talent, tech education. And I'm going to be introducing those panelists in just a moment. But I want to mention to all of you watching, please, if you have any questions for the panel or for us on the Inno team, go ahead and submit those through the questions box. That's going to be on your right-hand side, this sort of admin panel thing. You're going to see right there questions. If you have any questions for the panelists, please send them in via the questions box, and we'll try to answer as many of those as we can during the Q&A. But again, welcome to State of Innovation on the Future of Work. I'd like to, before we get started, briefly introduce our Charlotte staff writer, Elise Franco, who's been covering a lot of the stories that you're seeing now on the beat in our newsletter or on our website. And Elise is going to tell us a little bit about what Charlotte Inno is and what we do.
Thanks, Juan. Hi, everyone. My name is Elise Franco, as Juan has just mentioned. I'm the writer here at Charlotte Inno. And for anyone unfamiliar with us and what we do, Inno is a part of a growing network of sites. We're currently in 14 markets across the country. Our 15th market is launching pretty soon, actually. And as a publication, we're committed to covering and connecting local technology, startups, growth, and innovation. Charlotte Inno covers the local ecosystem via daily stories, a twice-a-week newsletter called The Beat, and quarterly events, which are currently all virtual. You can check us out at charlotteinno.com to see what we're all about, and don't forget to sign up for The Beat. The Beat is really the best way to stay plugged into everything that's impacting the local innovation economy. In it, you're going to get the local tech and startup news you need, the analysis you're probably not going to find anywhere else, information on upcoming events and really cool job openings, as well as so much more. And we'd really like to thank JLL, our presenting sponsor, our founding partners, EY, Carolina Fintech Hub, OrthoCarolina, and the City of Charlotte, as well as our supporting sponsors, Trisata, DualBot Partners, and NC Idea for making this event possible. Finally, I would like to introduce Tariq Barkari from Carolina Fintech Hub to make a few remarks to start us off.
Hello, thank you all so much. Appreciate everything you guys are doing. And the Carolina Fintech Hub, if you're not familiar with us, aside from being a proud sponsor of Charlotte Inno and all the great work that Juan is doing, we are here to really embrace technology, fintech, and really all the verticals that use technology and fintech in the Charlotte industry and the surrounding region to create programming in the areas of innovation, of talent, of outreach that really bring us all together, that create a fintech and tech destination, and also impact from a social perspective, things like upward mobility and equity. So we've been hard at work for that for a long time. And I would just say that this conversation is going to be of the utmost importance because as we're looking to recover from COVID right now, a lot of people look at this crisis in similar nature to the way we looked at the financial crisis in 2007 and 2008. It's exactly the exact opposite, in fact, where in 2007, we had a banking system that was our car that had stalled out, and we used billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, to get that car jump-started with an underlying sound economy. Now it's the exact opposite, where the banking system, that car is doing fairly well. That engine is running with a few hiccups here and there. It's the underlying fuel that has stalled it out. And that fuel is really driven by business, small business, but also workforce. And it is unprecedented to think of jump-starting that engine with a lack of fuel. So how we envision the future of workforce is fundamental to how we recover in the history books looking back from this really, really impactful crisis.
Thanks so much, Tarek. I'm now going to pass it off to Chris Schaaf to make a few remarks for JLL.
Thanks so much. Simply put, at JLL, we help companies buy, lease, sell, sublease, and build office, industrial, retail, and apartment projects across the globe. We've spent the past 4 years with a clear focus on driving technological innovation to help create headwinds in an industry that candidly has been antiquated and slow to adopt. So it's a pleasure for us to be a part of a forward-thinking workplace discussion with you and leaders of Charlotte's innovative ecosystem. At JLL, we have 94,000 professionals in every part of the world where serving our clients and creating solutions to align real estate and business together is the priority. Our team has been very fortunate to be at the forefront of negotiations that has helped shape our beautiful city skyline. We represent a diverse range of occupiers that range from Fortune 500s in an uptown tower to a startup that needs space for 5 people in a suburban office park. So our services are germane to everyone, everywhere. It's no longer fair for us, for any of us, to look at the workplace in the same manner as we did in a pre-COVID world. And in April, we surveyed thousands of working professionals across the country in anticipation of reentry. And themes along the lines of safety, health, and trust were by far the most common statements delivered back to us by the respondents. As a result, we know we are positioned to witness radical change to our industry that will drive a new form of how we work, whether that means a heavier or exclusive emphasis on remote working, further focus on de-densification, growth towards less congested suburban areas, or technological advances towards a touchless world. We feel it's our fiduciary responsibility to unlock the potential and opportunity that this new normal will bring to our peers and respective organizations. We say often, innovation is often a resultant of change. So Peter, Carla, Rod, and myself and the rest of the panel are excited to discuss our beliefs as we look forward to the future and the impact today's pandemic will have on all of us. So thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. And now we're going to welcome our roundtable speakers. So joining Chris, they're going to be turning their cameras on. We've got Peter Marsh, Rod Garvin, and Carla Shields. We're going to do a quick intro on each of you, if you guys don't mind. And I'll go ahead and start with Chris. We had a chance to meet you already. Chris is the Managing Director of Tenant Consulting at JLL. Chris, can you tell us just a little bit about what that actually means? What is the Tenant Consulting Group?
Yeah, thank you, Juan. So simply put, we advise occupiers of office space on a daily basis, whether someone's looking to grow, contract, relocate, open up a new office in another market outside of the Carolinas where we sit. Our job and responsibility is to provide consulting advice for them and to be strategic in how to align the business objectives with the real estate objectives.
Got it. And then are you working from home during this time? It looks like you're there at home.
I am currently working from home. I will say that our company has entered phase 1 of reentry. So we do have, I think, 11 people back in our office. Our corporate office in Charlotte is in South Park. So we're starting to phase into what we hope will be a little bit of normalcy, but I'm currently sitting at home.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris, for being here. Next up, we've got Peter Marsh, who's the founder of Flywheel Co-working and the owner of co-owner of Workplace Architecture and Design. Peter, welcome.
Thank you, Juan. It's really a pleasure to be here today and to serve on the panel. Obviously, we are deeply immersed in the topic, given that we're one of the leading designers of commercial real estate here in North Carolina and serving corporations nationwide. And we also bring our unique perspective as a designer and operator of co-working innovation spaces. We're in the process of building out our footprint throughout the Southeast. We have a location in Winston-Salem, a really great location in Lake Norman in partnership with Davidson College, We just announced a new location in Concord, North Carolina, which will be serving all of Cabarrus County, and we're in development on a location in Greenville, South Carolina. So it's a topic that's near and dear to our heart from a co-working and a design perspective.
Absolutely, and I think Elise just wrote a story on your Cabarrus Innovation Center announcement, so congrats on that.
Yep.
Are you working out of Flywheel today?
I'm working out of Flywheel, Winston-Salem. We, as soon as the governor finished releasing his phase 1 guidelines, we reopened our spaces.
Fantastic. Thanks, Peter, for joining us today. Next up, we have Rod Garvin, who is the Senior Vice President of Talent Insights with the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. Rod, welcome.
How you doing, Juan? Thanks for having me today. Appreciate you and the Charlotte Inno team inviting me. I am Rod Garvin. I represent the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. We are the regional economic development organization for the 15-county Charlotte region. That includes 11 counties in North Carolina, 4 in South Carolina. My area of focus is talent, and really it's around trying to answer one fundamental question, and that's, how do we continue to grow our talent in a way that meets employer demand for those businesses that we want to recruit and help grow, and those that are here? How do we help grow those businesses and keep them in our region? Tarek, or Council Member Bakari, said it well. We have to do that through a lens of equity. As a part of our mission, we're committed to prosperity for all. So we're looking at not only how do we serve business, but how do we make sure that all of the residents in our community are able to benefit from economic growth. And that relates to another hat that I wear as Executive Director of the CLT Alliance Foundation. We're really looking at, how do we make that direct impact? How do we make sure individuals have the education and skills they need to succeed? How do we drive research that helps us serve all of our stakeholders? And how do we support small businesses, diverse small businesses in particular? So again, excited to be here. The future of work is a topic that I have an interest in, not only from a professional standpoint, but from a personal standpoint. So I look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, fantastic, Rob. Thank you. And you're in the office today, aren't you?
I am. We'll probably talk about that a little bit more, but I shared with Juan and Cassidy earlier that if I'm on an important call like this, I prefer to get out of the house and come into the office. So good to be here.
Well, very good, Rod. And then last but certainly not least, we have Carla Shields, who's the Executive Director of the Computer Technology Institute at Cpcc. Carla, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Juan, and welcome everybody. Glad to be excited to be part of this great panel of experts to talk about where are we going. Does anybody really know?
Yeah.
I think right now what you can look at on my perspective is I really do focus about where our community is as far as their unemployment status and how do we move them back into work. We know that remote working is very high right now, even though there's a couple of us that are back to work in that phase 1 section. 90% of companies are still having remote workers. Can people get jobs? Yes. Are people still hiring? Yes. So how do we make that transition? So I'm here to kind of talk about that a little bit today and how technology has really made an impact in everyone's lives through the COVID. So let's see what we can do today.
Yeah, fantastic, Carla. Thank you. Thanks. So we've got some representation here on both the workspace and sort of the talent side of this question of what is the future of work. So I want to start real quick on the workspace side because that's the most obvious question, right? Many of us are working from home or had been working from home, and many people are saying, look, the workspace is probably going to change as a result of this. So maybe Chris, Peter, if you're dealing directly with workspace issues, what are you seeing as the biggest issues that clients and others are asking or are bringing up, or what are you seeing as far as trends that might impact the workplace of the future?
Yeah, well, Carla said it well. I think we've spent the past 3 months guiding and hypothesizing on something we've really never seen before. So we're doing our consultative best effort to try and figure out solutions around what's going on. And I know when I can speak for myself and our team, we're used to solving problems, and that's what we do. And no one on here has ever been throughout the situation that we're going through right now. So the biggest thing that we've done, first and foremost, is not only to stay connected internally. We have conference calls, video conferencing every single day with our team, but we're also doing the same with our clients, and learning about how they're keeping engaged and how they're collaborating and how they're doing all these different things that, the spatial environment was really levered before to create culture and build an environment that everyone wanted to go to. So how do we go back to that by leveraging technology while we're in this brief window? And I think the biggest theme that we've run up on is America's always on work culture has reached new heights. And whatever boundaries remained between work and life have simply disappeared. So what we feel like going forward is I mentioned this in my opening remarks, it's our opportunity to figure out how we're better going forward and leveraging the workplace. And whether that's through a hybrid of working from anywhere, not working from home, so working from anywhere, and then the office, balancing that with technologies and everything else to make sure it's a productive environment that we're in going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Peter, what about you? Any trends that you're seeing in terms of workspace?
Yeah, I think, Chris has touched on a lot of them, but from the perspective of both architecture and co-working, I think the phenomenon of social distancing is not only going to have a short-term impact, but I think it's also going to have a lasting impact. The pendulum has always kind of swung back and forth between the levels of density and the level of open plan versus enclosed space. This is not a pendulum. This is a sledgehammer that has basically hit corporate office planning, and we're seeing an absolute significant de-densifying of workplaces as a requirement to satisfy social distancing requirements. And it begins at the front door. The touch points, the physical touch points. We're having to rethink how buildings function in terms of social distancing of the occupants from the moment they walk in the door through, the elevator transit, which is a significant choke point for moving people through a building if you're trying to social distance. So those are examples of some of the short-term impacts in terms of density. But longer term, prior to COVID, there was already a confluence between residential and commercial environments. In fact, there's a new term out there called resimercial. And this loss of boundary between our home life and our work life is also being reflected in the design of commercial environments. So I think what you're going to see is a lot more elbow room and more of a residential feel coming into the workplace because, kind of creating synchronicity between your home office and your corporate office type environments. And there's also going to be a huge impact on the selection of materials that we use to design spaces. Chris and I were talking earlier about this on our warm-up call, that corporations are discovering that the cleaning agents that are required to sanitize the space are not real friendly with things like, finishes on wooden furniture and things of that nature. So we're going to see a whole different mix of materials coming into play that are responsive to sanitizing, cleaning, and I think that's not just a short-term trend. That's going to be a longer-term impact in terms of how we think about designing and selecting for our workspaces. Yeah. On the co-working side, interestingly, there was obviously a short-term impact on use of co-working spaces during the stay-at-home orders. And our membership went down a little bit, but long-term, we think we're very bullish about the concept of co-working environments that are providing social distancing and, the necessary controlled work environment, because people just go nuts working from home. It doesn't work for everyone. And working from home long term, as Chris implied, can, you know, it can drive you crazy, particularly if you have small kids, pets, and all that kind of stuff that distract you from getting your work done. So the genie is out of the bottle as far as remote work. We're never going back to the flexibility that we're currently, the lack of flexibility that we experienced previously. That's never coming back. We are in a long-term future work environment where flexibility and being flexible as a manager towards your employees, understanding the boundaries that are needed, all of that is here to stay. And co-working environments supply a highly valued and a highly needed solution for people that are now remote workers or working from home or solopreneurs as a result of you know, layoffs and other changes as a result of the pandemic.
I do want to touch a little bit more on co-working because it's a big question. We have a lot of co-working spaces in Charlotte. I think it's like 20 different co-working spaces or something like that. And I'm curious, Carla, Rod, from what you're seeing from either your clients, you know, the Alliance companies that you work with at the Alliance, or maybe even some of the companies that you talk to, Carla, on the training side, has there been any talk about co-working or where employees might be working from?
Well, I'll speak to that. You know, Peter, you had a good point. What we're starting to see is that companies are becoming a lot more flexible. So I don't see anyone really going back to 100% no remote working. I think that's now the new norm. We've learned through this pandemic that we can continue to work. We can continue to have meetings. You know, Chris, you said anywhere. One of my coworkers happens to be at the beach this whole time, and I'm in my brain, I'm like, you're on vacation. If you're at the beach, you're not working. She's like, no, I'm working. I'm like, well, I'm not at the beach, you know? So I think like our whole way of thinking and working, it's changing. What's really affected is that we have a huge population, and this is, you know, true to my heart, that has really been affected in the employment spectrum, where they didn't have a choice of working from home or not. They simply just lost their job. That is very critical. So whether it's a shared working space or not, you know, that's another issue that we have to look at for our community, is how do we get everybody back up into some form of working remotely or in a shared space. But that to me, of course, is dear to my heart.
Rod, how about, yeah, go ahead.
I'll take a look at it. I'll kind of back into the co-working question and just, you know, talk a little bit about economic development, which all of our panelists are familiar with. You know, but when we think about, you know, business recruitment and expansion, there's some key variables, right, that keep us competitive. Talent is one, and based on research that we've done with site selection consultants and C-suite leaders, when we ask them to choose what's the most important factor, they'll often say talent. Incentives are also important, infrastructure, quality of life, cost of living. But real estate, or what we call real estate product, is also very important. And we're fortunate to have a diverse economy that consists of financial services, technology, the new integration that we call Fintech, as well as manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, and other sectors. So depending on which sector you're looking at is going to determine, you know, how this pandemic is impacting how we think about real estate. On the manufacturing side, with those being essential businesses and many of them now producing PPEs, the traditional space that they've had is still very relevant, still important. So, you know, folks are still going to work in our manufacturing facilities, still having to report. You know, we have to thank those individuals. Our heart goes out, because just like our frontline workers in healthcare, restaurants, retail, and other spaces, you know, they are at higher risk. But when we look at corporate offices, we're going to see significant changes. You know, Chris and Peter and Carla have touched on that. And a question that we have to ask as an economic development organization is, what happens if how we think about headquarters is not as tied to location? So much of business relocation decisions have been made based on, what's the best environment for a large corporate office. Now we have to think about what business recruitment and expansion looks like when it's not as tied to physical location. So we are going to see changes in corporate real estate and how that factors into economic development. That may actually elevate the significance of co-working, because if it's not so much about square footage and necessarily being in a skyscraper or a large office, then the co-working becomes an option. But that model has to adapt too. You've got to take into account the occupancy, the social distancing, as Peter referenced, the private office space for your solo entrepreneurs and 1 and 2 person teams may become a primary client, a primary customer. So that's going to be an interesting space as well, but definitely see co-working as a significant part of the ecosystem, but we're going to have to see change and evolution in all of those areas.
Yeah, interesting. And I think that both co-working and the traditional office, in terms of sort of a design, kind of hits on a few things that, Chris, I may be wrong, but I think you had mentioned when we had our call before, and I had in my notes here, the commute to work, workplace cleanliness, proximity of workstations, and then the utilization of data sensors. Is that right? Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, so I had referenced the survey in my opening remarks that we did, and we've done more of a localized survey where the data is still being aggregated. But of the almost 2,000 different respondents, the 4 kind of primary points of emphasis outside of safety, health, and trust were, how am I going to get to work? And the how am I going to get to work question, we think, is really going to benefit a city like Charlotte. You look at, we've talked a little bit about de-densification, and you talk about like density of cities. I was emailing back and forth with our research team earlier today, and the city of New York has 29,000 people per square mile in Manhattan. The city of Charlotte has 2,700 people per square mile. And so where we think the opportunities that like Rod and team have are recruiting a lot of these businesses and companies that are either looking for a hub and spoke model, looking to put some of their people that are in some of the COVID impacted areas where you have to rely on stuff like the subway or the metro and other means of transportation to get to work. That is absolutely going to change. But I think first and foremost, outside of that, and I think it goes hand in hand with what you are doing at Charlotte Inno, is really understanding how your space is being used. And our clients are always asking how they're being used. And really it comes down to like the utilization of space and utilizing data sensors to tell you how you're using space. So in the pre-COVID world, data sensors were used to study congregation patterns, density, and figure out where employees were gathering so you could emphasize those different parts of the space to try and create that momentum and energy and all those different things. Well, fast forward to where we are today, post-COVID, those sensors are now being used to devise professional and social distancing strategies. So it's almost doing the opposite. And we have, JOL has a venture capital fund called JOL Spark, and we've seen an acceleration of investment into these data sensor companies that are trying to figure out how to make people's environments kind of live and how to make them smarter. And we recently led around with a company called VergeSense that's doing this exact same thing. So the workplace is going to get a lot smarter. So Rod will know over the course of a week, a month, 6 months, and a year, what's the percentage of time he actually spends sitting at his desk. The same goes for Peter, Carla, myself, and others. And that's just going to make our environment a lot smarter, better, and more effective.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because I think you're right. So much of recent work design, and I'm not an expert in that field, but from what I've seen has been, how do we increase collaboration? How do we increase collision, right? Put the bathrooms in a central place so that all employees, or the break room, bump into each other so that they can start to have new ideas. Like you want that collision of people to create more ideas, more innovation. Now we're talking about everybody needs to stay in their office, or how are we going to space people out? How do we avoid amassing too many people all at once. What's that going to do to innovation? And Peter, this I think goes to co-working as well. One of the benefits of co-working is you get a bunch of like creative minds in the same facility. You get them to interact with events and free coffee and whatever else. Now we're talking about encouraging them to stay in their offices. How do you weigh one without sacrificing the other?
Yeah, so I think 2 points. I want to talk about the technology and community. So co-working spaces work really well when there's a tightly knit community of entrepreneurs and freelancers and solopreneurs that are occupying the same space. What a lot of people don't understand about co-working is, so in our case, our typical space is around 20,000 square feet. That supports approximately 200 members on average. But on any given day, typically only 30 to 50 people are in the space. So we're actually able to accommodate social distancing in our current designs without having to do a major reset. What's important, though, to remember is that human beings are social animals. This is a very difficult experience for everyone. The ability to collaborate and feel that personal community connection virtually it's okay, but it's never going to be replaced by the in-person experience. So we've, as soon as we reopened our space, we had members coming back in simply because of the need for that human interaction and that feeling of community. And that exchange of ideas that even if you're wearing a mask, it's better than trying to do everything completely virtually. So the psychology and the sense of community that co-working spaces fosters, I think, is very important. And in fact, I think Chris would agree that many of our corporate clients are beginning to model themselves off of co-working spaces because of the sense of community and the sense of culture that it can instill and invigorate in a corporate environment. On the technology side, there's no question that we have fast-forwarded technologically to enable remote workers. We have fast-forwarded technologically to collaborate in a virtual manner, but we're also seeing a dramatic fast-forwarding in smart building technologies, which Chris referred to. So, for example, we have already deployed technology that allows us to do interior positioning tracking. So it's very difficult to get accurate distancing measurements and metrics using GPS technology and Bluetooth and things of that nature. To get really accurate measurement of how people are spacing themselves on an interior basis, you have to use triangulation and what's called interior positioning systems. We've deployed that in our co-working spaces, so our community managers get an immediate notification if there's a violation of social distancing. It's anonymized, it's not, personal data, but they are notified if there's a violation of protocols based on social distancing. And that's a really hard technology to deploy. You have to have a specific deployment of sensors within the interior environment, but we've been able to figure that out. And, we wouldn't have even begun to think of that 3 months ago, right? So all of these new technology deployments are, there's just a surge of these kind of applications and this thoughtfulness about how do we make our buildings more intelligent from a health standpoint? How do we make our buildings more intelligent from a population management standpoint? These are going to have lasting positive impacts on how we design buildings.
Yeah, interesting. One of the 4 items that Chris had mentioned, commute from work and how that's going to impact even growth. Rod, I wonder if there's something that you might be seeing. There was an article somewhere about how cities like Charlotte may grow because as companies are spending, a lot of money on their workforce up in New York City, if they're asking their workforce to stay home, right, because they don't want them on the subways or in the Uber cars, then what's the point of being in a city as expensive as New York, right? Why not send them to another city as amazing as Charlotte? What are you seeing on your end as far as recruitment of companies because of that?
Yeah, Chris actually took a page out of my notes. I was going to talk about that study about New York that our business recruitment team shared. But no, that's an important trend. And another stat based on that study is a 40% increase in companies considering relocation. And then Charlotte's a top 10 market. And that's just New York. If we look at what's happening in California and other parts of the country, we know that there's got to be some movement from an economic development standpoint. I talked about, variables and factors that lead to our regional competitiveness. Infrastructure is another one of those. We think about that broadly. So obviously transportation is an important part of that, but we're even looking at internet connectivity and broadband as another important infrastructure issue that we need to deal with, especially in terms of remote working. The commuting aspect is really interesting, right? So one, it's a benefit, and I've long been a proponent of employee freedom in terms of autonomy, flexibility, the opportunity to participate in the decision making of an organization. Never thought it would take a pandemic to help us move in that direction. But as Peter said, the cat is out of the bag. There's no, people have tasted freedom and there's no going back. The talent that organizations want to attract and keep, they've experienced this. My daughter, my oldest daughter is interning with TIAA right now. This whole class of interns, their first professional working experience is virtual.
Yeah.
So for them, the challenge is, having to ever go into the office. I think from an innovation standpoint, and even before the pandemic, there was a lot of research that showed that there's benefits of remote working, but there's benefits of having that direct interaction. So it's how do you balance that productivity and innovation from a collaboration standpoint? So hybrid is ideal. It is ideal to at least have some time when folks can come together in a physical environment. Even if it's through limited contacting, even if it's with face masks. But that benefit of flexibility and the option of working from home, especially when you think about us being a region that I like to equate to a small state with about 3 million people. If you're living in one of our outer counties, but working for a company based in Charlotte, most of those folks don't want to have to drive. They want to minimize that commute time. Also, we know that we've had a infrastructure problem and some significant traffic congestion. We're actually alleviating some of that right now. So there's a benefit from that standpoint too, as a shorter term solution while we try to figure out more robust infrastructure transformation changes for the future. So there's a lot of benefits, not only in terms of how we work, in terms of how we attract and keep talent, but even in terms of our own competitive advantage by giving people options and alleviating the traffic and contributing to less road rage in the region as well.
Yeah, not a bad thing. Not a bad thing at all. Carla, I'm curious if from students you're hearing anything in terms of their concerns. Are they concerned about the remote work or the job situation? And you, correct me if I'm wrong, but you also work with not corporate education, right? Is that right?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, what I'm finding, and everybody's really kind of excited, is if you had gotten displaced, this is an opportunity for you to become that entrepreneur. So that gig economy, I think, is still really strong because you can actually market your talents out there. So it's really broad in that spectrum. It's opened it up the doors. For our students, for the clients that we've served, what has always been kind of the underlining tone is, I live in Charlotte, I want to stay in Charlotte, and even if that great job is somewhere else, I want to stay here in Charlotte. Well, now all those doors, all those boundaries have been opened. So you can, back to Rod's point, you can stay here in Charlotte. You can be working for a company in New York or California or somewhere else, Seattle, because companies are looking now for that remote worker. If you're bringing me the talent, the skills, whether it be a small contract assignment or long-term, I think we've really taken away all those state boundaries. So to me, this has really broadened our ability to do different things. So that's where that's as far as our clients and students, they're seeing that opportunity as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think the gig economy, you've got a lot of people who have either been displaced or are now working from home, maybe part-time rather than full-time. They have some extra time, and more work is now available to do remotely. And they're able to sort of flex their entrepreneurial muscles. And that's a big change as well. At least the remote work that can be done, from a computer, or the gig work that can be done from a computer. I want to touch real quick, just back on the office space thing for Chris and Peter. And there was a conversation about, and I don't remember who this was with, but about how some banks were finding that they were wearing their countertops because of the cleaning materials that were used. And I think, Peter, you mentioned, cleaning material, the chemicals that we use to clean and all of that. How is all of that going to change the materials that we use or the way that spaces are designed so that it's easier to keep them disinfected, easier to keep them clean?
Well, there's no question that we're completely changing our thought process about material selection. So, non-porous materials that are not going to be harmed by cleaning agents and cleaning solvents are definitely, both a short-term and a long-term specification issue. There's quite a debate around things like embedded antimicrobials and in surfaces and fabrics, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. So I won't go into the details of that, but I think non-porous surfaces that are going to clean well and look clean, because a lot of this is psychological, are here to stay in terms of your horizontal and vertical surfaces. So in terms of workstation design, for example, I think you're going to see more glass, and I think you're going to see more writable or laminate type vertical surfaces as well as horizontal surfaces. Obviously, the horizon of the division between workers is likely to go up. It had been going down. So the up glass is going to get taller and the overall panel height is likely to get higher. So you have both more psychological and physical separation between users. When it comes to fabrics, I think people are going to be thinking twice about the seating that they sit in, whether it's clean, whether it's cleanable, and whether they see it being clean during the day. So certain fabrics are not going to respond well to that short-term environment that we're experiencing. So some of your non-color fast wools and cotton blends and things of that nature, those are out from a specification standpoint, and you're going to see more cleanable fabrics being specified and non-porous fabrics as well. So more synthetic leathers, vinyls, things of that nature.
Yeah, it's amazing how much is impacted in terms of sort of design, material selection, and everything. And I wonder, and maybe Chris or Peter, you've seen this. I was reading an article about how even rugs, carpets in carpeting might be designed with patterns every 6 feet, right? So that you have these, subconscious visual cues for social distancing. Have you guys run into anything like that?
We haven't.
Peter, go ahead and chime in.
Yeah. What we have seen is using appliques quite a bit. I think a lot of building owners are, buying in decals and appliques that they can use to create those physical cues. But I personally haven't seen that in the specification of flooring, but it's a great idea, Juan, and I think I'm going to go talk to my staff after this call.
Yeah. Hey, Juan, one thing I'll say, and you could hear it in the specificity that Peter had referred to, all of the ways that surfaces are cleaned and the way that the workplace surfaces that we use. Sometimes I have to dumb things down for the liberal arts guy myself, but I will say that where we used to be, which is we're going to come in and we're going to vacuum the floors, we're going to take out the trash, we're going to clean the restrooms, is totally transformed into all of these other services and everything else. So again, I know I've said it a lot, but I'm going to continue to say it because it's really relevant, like safety, health, and trust. Knowing that that stuff is happening the same way that it's happening in the retail space and restaurants, the same way that it's now happening on your airplane that you get on at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. In some event, it's almost never been safer and cleaner for any of these product types for you to go on. And I think you could argue that we had gotten a long way away from that, and this is a good reminder that it's a strong push to make sure that it is heavily emphasized on how we work going forward.
Yeah, fantastic. So I've got a few questions that are coming in here from the audience, but I want to take one last statement from everybody. If you could, we'll go around really quick. The biggest challenge that you see in the future of work from your perspective, or the most exciting thing that you're seeing, let's start with Carla.
Thank you. Well, the most exciting thing that I'm seeing is I got a new face shield so that if I'm presenting in front of a group of people, I now wear a face shield. No, that's a joke. That's not the most exciting, but it is actually, I have an entire office now full of PPE stuff. Here at the school, things that are different. We now will greet students with gloves and masks. So that's something new. So you don't have to touch any of the surfaces, going back to the cleaning component. I think what's exciting, as I mentioned already, is that all the boundaries have been collapsed, and we now have a nationwide ability to go and work anywhere, everywhere. I think we also can tap into talents that we may have hidden or not have used through some of the other, short-term contract opportunities that are available. I think that now we are more adaptable, more flexible. So the pandemic has some of the positive outcomes. That's how I'm looking at it. We've used to be so strict and confined in how we operated, going to work from 8 to 5, and all of those confinements have been broken, and I think that's the exciting thing about where we are today.
Awesome. Thanks, Carla. Rod, what biggest challenge or what's got you most excited?
So I think we have a true two-sided coin, right? We have crisis and opportunity. I think we have to acknowledge, there's a lot of folks suffering right now. We have more than 1.4 million unemployment claims in North and South Carolina. Our research team is estimating we're getting close to 200,000 unemployed in our immediate region. So that's a challenge, and a lot of small businesses and entrepreneurial companies that we've talked about are extremely challenged right now. Carl and I have actually had a chance to get to know each other quite a bit over the past few weeks. We're launching an initiative called Access to Opportunity, which is focused on helping individuals upskill during COVID-19 and beyond. I do share the sentiment that I don't think we're ever truly going to be post-pandemic. I just think the reality that we're in, we will always be thinking about when's the next pandemic coming, whether it's COVID resurfacing or some other virus, right? So business models will have to be in place to mitigate that risk. You'll already want to have that remote working infrastructure. You'll already want to have the capability of doing business with minimal contact. What I'm excited about is the opportunity to truly create a new society where equity, where inclusion, where diversity is at the forefront of everything that we do. We know that there's not just a biological pandemic, but we're facing hundreds of years of a racial pandemic as well. And there's extreme energy around that and an opportunity to create significant change. So that's what I'm excited about. This is a once in a generation opportunity. We have to get it right, or we're going to look down the road and say, hey, we had some advances in technology, we're working differently, We created some different kinds of businesses, but we still have extreme inequity. We still have extreme lack of economic mobility. So this is a moment that we really have to seize to create the kind of community and world that we all want to see.
Awesome. Thanks, Rod. And Peter, I do want to get to some of these questions, and some of these apply to you. So let me get a Q&A question, a couple Q&A questions here for you, and then if you want to sprinkle in your challenge and excitement. Several are on this whole idea of technology that tracks where you are in the building. And we have one here asking, what was the interior positioning system that you used for Flywheel? And several were on, are there any privacy concerns? Will employees or co-working members resist participation in something like that? So which system, and what are your thoughts on those concerns?
So there are a number of technologies that you can take a look at. The most accurate is beacon technology, where you basically triangulate location and interior space by deploying an interior beacon system. So think of it as taking a satellite system from the sky and putting it inside your interior space, and then using the Bluetooth signals off of cell phones to create fairly accurate interior positioning. So that's the basic technology. It's if you just do a Google search for interior positioning systems, beacon technologies, you'll find basically a technology that allows you to get the precise enough measurement to figure out whether or not people are actually social distancing. GPS systems in general are only accurate to around 20 feet. Interior positioning systems are accurate to within inches. So that's the technology that we built off of because it provided the degree of accuracy. It's absolutely critical that you anonymize the data. All we're interested in is, are the protocols being followed? We're not interested in who it is or, what it is, so to speak. It's just, are the protocols being followed? Is an intervention required? And obviously there are certain portions of the building that you absolutely do not want the beacons to read. I'll leave it at that.
That makes sense. Chris, I've got a question here specifically for JLL. Will companies like JLL allow commercial tenants to renegotiate lease terms? And can this be mandated by pandemic impacts? Have you run into anything like that?
Think about the best way to ask that one. So to go back, I work on behalf of office occupiers every single day. There's another division within JLL of our 94,000 people that represent the actual building owner. The quick answer to the renegotiation is yes. The caveat to that is the but, and it depends on when your lease is maturing, what your goals are, how the space and location is working out for you. So it's hard to answer that question in a vacuum
Sure.
without knowing the specifics around the actual event. We had several discussions, not only with building owners and landlords, but also with clients as well, on rent deferral and rent abatement as we entered into April, when no one was using their office. And that was what we feel like a vehicle that was certainly accelerated on the retail side, because if you have a restaurant and people aren't coming to your restaurant, you also can't, there's no revenue coming in for the business. As a very unbiased opinion and just commentary, rent deferrals and rent abatements to date in the office world across the country have been very, very, very minor. I'm sure there are examples here and there where things have been altered and tweaked, but that's not opinion, that's just analysis and fact. So.
And there was a follow-on on that. Whether do you think the insurance model might be adjusted to include pandemic risks? Is that something we're going to see more of in the future?
So yes, at least at the forefront of trying to get it weaved under the insurance model, the answer is yes. There's also force majeure clauses and leases that account for a variety of different events, whether that is a tornado, a large storm, acts of war, things like that. And there's a lot of real estate attorneys, people like myself, advisors, et cetera, that are trying to get pandemics and specifically the novel coronavirus into there as an option as well. But to date, when it comes to the force majeure clause, where it would technically give a client or a tenant relief under that model, pandemics have not been in there previously to date.
Got it.
And
Thanks.
Juan, if I can tag on to that,
Yeah.
we're also seeing that language enter construction contracts. So for
Yeah.
tenant upfits and for new building construction, it's difficult to plan the exact construction schedule the way we could before, because there's too many variables related to the pandemic. So we're seeing COVID-19 and force majeure clauses enter into the construction contracts as well.
Gotcha. One of the questions here is, won't all of these initiatives you're discussing be top down, which then raises the question of accountability and reporting? So a lot of things that we're talking about are top down. What's what does the employee say to a lot of these ideas?
Juan, are we talking about kind of the shifts in workplace policies and practices? Is that we're addressing?
Believe so, yeah. And I'm guessing here from the question, but I believe so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. Kind of when I talked about this concept of employee freedom, it's not just about can you work flexibly, can you kind of determine your own schedule, but it's do you have a voice? And I think this gets to the talent issue. We have increasingly, I'm a Gen Xer, but increasingly with each generation, the millennials in particular, and definitely with Gen Z, they want to have a say, in how, not only how they work, but what are the values and the priorities of the organization. A lot of statements have been made about how companies want to take on issues of racial inequality and want to promote equity and inclusion, but how do we do that? How do we live up to that? Talent in general, but I think young talent in particular wants to be a part of that conversation. So, I think you can think of the future of work in a number of ways. We can look at it in terms of the technical aspects and in terms of the policies and the practices, but we can also look at it in terms of what kind of organizations do we want to have, right?
Yeah.
What kind of society and community do we want to create? It definitely has to be holistic, and how we empower employees internally is just as important as what we do externally. Yeah,
no, that's great. And I think it does, those conversations have to happen, right, with the employee, employer on everything. A question here from Mary Allison. How may the pass-through costs related to these increases, such as the standards of cleaning materials, chemicals, cleaning technology, all of that, how could this potentially affect lease rates in both the traditional and co-working offices?
Yeah, I'm happy to take. Yeah, I'm happy to take that one, and then Peter, Rod, and Carla can supplement. So there are a lot of different elements that come to that. So you talk about an enhancement in cleaning, but as it stands today, the way leases are generally structured in our market, you pay a lease rate, and inside of that lease rate is inclusive of all your building operating expenses. As costs go up, whether that's taxes, insurance, or stuff like cleaning, those costs are passed through back to the tenant. So it's a really good question, because what we're trying to get smart on and be proactive on is, as those costs of services go up, technically as it stands today, those costs of services can be passed through back to the tenant. Now, on one hand, the tenant may be happier because they're operating in a cleaner space, which makes their people feel safer. But on the other hand, cost and operating costs, as we know, it will certainly go up. The other conversation comes towards indoor air quality. And we're hearing about a bunch of buildings in the city that are running almost on a 24-hour basis, where they used to run on a 12-hour basis. So the good news behind that is fresh air is coming in and out, and it's being dumped in the building, and it's being circulated constantly to prevent fear. The bad news is those building systems are one of the most expensive components of the operating expense line item. So as those costs go up, who's responsible for it? So people are going to have to get smarter, and there's going to have to be protectionary items and leases on behalf of tenants just to make sure they're protected there.
Yeah, lots of opportunities for you entrepreneurs and innovators out there that come up with better, more efficient ways of doing all of these things. I do want to mention that we are at the top of the hour. I've got a couple more questions. Panelists, if you have just a few more minutes, I'd love to get to these. If that's all right, everybody good to stay on for a couple more minutes? Great, but you know, in the audience, I understand we're at 4 o'clock now. So if now is the time for you need to hop off, feel free to do that. But we're going to continue for just a few minutes. And thank you guys all. So we've got lots of questions coming in. So there's definitely a lot of interest in this. I think the follow-on to that last comment there, Chris, was what about rental rate compression across the market? Has this taken place yet?
Yeah, so rents are a function of a lot of different factors in our business. And simply put, it comes down to supply and it comes down to demand. And Peter, Rod, and Carla know this really well. Our market was as healthy as it's ever been when it comes to supply or lack thereof. So all the cranes that are building all the towers in South End and Uptown and the other parts of our city, those buildings are 92% leased. And when you aggregate all of the vacancies and all of the space of the 4.5 million feet that's under construction in those respective areas. So I'd say because of that, historically, rents have not dropped. But what will drive rents is a flood of sublet space, and the inventory of sublet space will put pressure on some of the vacant space that direct landlords have. And over the past 8 days, we've seen 240,000 square feet. Our market's 50 million square feet, 240,000 feet of subleases being added to what I would call kind of our commercial MLS system. And that's not necessarily significant, but it's growing, and it's not as high as what's happening in some of the COVID-related or COVID-impacted markets, like we all know of. But I would tell you, unemployment, lack of population growth, which Rod, we talked about. Hopefully, we don't see that. Those factors, along with subleases and availabilities, will be the driving factors behind rental compression.
Gotcha. Thanks. Yeah. Here's one on conference rooms. How are touchless conference and collaboration spaces being integrated, and what technology modifications on existing spaces might be implemented? So touchless conference and collaboration spaces, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can go with that one. So we are seeing our clients moving towards wireless interaction with displays, so that you can share information without having to touch a control panel, having to share controls with other users in the room. So I think that's pretty much here to stay, and it's a great technology to deploy if you haven't already. To the generational expectations for millennials and younger, you know, that technology is now an expectation. If you don't have HD cameras, really good displays, and touchless interaction with your technology, you're not meeting the expectations of today's workforce. So that's an investment that I think all employers are going to have to consider moving forward. It's going to go back to the concept of smart buildings. So the technologies are already there today, where when you walk into a conference room, the room recognizes you as a user, it turns on the lights, and it configures to your specification. So that technology is out there. The cost of deployment is coming way down, and I think this disruption is really going to drive more and more of that. Things like you know, lock systems that are touchless, where you can enter a space without having to actually contact a physical touchpad. But just by having proximity sensors, you know, the door unlocks and opens for you, things of that nature. So yeah, the entire building is going to be designed for more fluid and touchless movement. You know, other than that, I think the key to conference room spaces is we have had to deploy custodial services where we're cleaning a minimum of 3 times a day. You know, And we're trying to ingrain in our user protocols, every time you finish using a horizontal surface, wipe it down and sanitize it. So we've deployed spray bottles, cleaning rags. We chose to go with cloth as opposed to disposable for environmental considerations. And then we have, you know, dispenser and containers to pick up, you know, the dirty rags in every room, in every one of our spaces. So I don't see that really going away. I think we're kind of creating habits that are going to be long lasting, and you're going to need to kind of incorporate those designs into the environment. So it's not only touchless, but it's user sanitized, if you will.
Yeah, the office of the future. Now, how might these employee and customer expectations impact small businesses that can't afford all of these changes?
Juan,
go ahead, Rod.
We actually pulled a task force together under the leadership of Janet Labar, President and CEO, called Ready Charlotte, and the city of Charlotte and other groups, have some task force, looking at how do we best support small businesses. Fortunately, we've got CARES Act funding and other federal funding that can help support. But definitely, we need to look at how we help small, mid-sized businesses become more resilient and adapt with these technologies. If we know that we're moving to limited touch, contactless business models in terms of how we work together, in terms of how we interact with customers, and that's across businesses. Obviously not just retail, restaurants and hospitality, but in professional services and other areas as well. We have to provide that support to help our businesses get there. So it's definitely something that's top of mind for us as an organization and the leaders that we're working with. And we do believe that our large employers can play a role, not only in terms of financial resources, but in terms of the intellectual capital and the thought leadership and the best practices that they can bring to bear.
Yeah, and I think that is going to be important because we're talking about high rises in co-working spaces, but we've got a lot of other smaller businesses, smaller facilities that have to deal with customer expectations and employee challenges. We'll go ahead and end on this one. I think I got through them all. Also related to costs, if and when operating costs go down, costs around office space, leases, and utilities, will tenants and staff be given more financial support to take on those costs of running home working spaces? So I guess as we're using the offices less, do we think employees might be given more support for the equipment that they need to work remotely?
Yeah, that's a great question. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I'll just speak from our data set, which is the clients that we work with every day. Our clients have been highly supportive of their employees and trying to support them, whether it's giving them a stipend for X amount of dollars, where if they need to buy a chair for their office, or if they need to buy a desk, or they need to buy a monitor, different things like that. So again, we're talking about an approach where our U.S. economy, when you talk about jobs that were officing out of these office buildings, it was exclusively officing out of these office buildings. It's going to change, and the change is going to be this hybrid approach like we've talked about. So if it's going to change and corporations are going to adopt it, which they have and they will, then employers will also have to recognize the need that every single one of us, whether it's us on a panel or the people that were kind enough to join the call today, they're going to have to get some type of support from a monetary level to furnish their home office, so it's as efficient as their office is as well.
Fantastic. All right. I think that does it. We've gotten through all of the questions there. If there were any questions that I did not get a chance to answer, we have a handout. If you look over in the panel, there is a section called handouts where you can get, you can see information here on Chris, Peter, Rod, and Carla, and learn a little bit more about them. I think there's some LinkedIn information or contact information if you want to reach out with those questions. So we do want to thank you all. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Rod. Thank you, Carla, for joining us today to have this conversation. I think it was fascinating. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody on the call did as well. We also want to thank our founding partners, EY, Carolina Fintech Hub, OrthoCarolina, City of Charlotte, our supporting partners at Tresata, Dual Boot, and NC Idea, and of course, JLL, our presenting sponsor for this, making this conversation possible. So thank you all so much. Look for us in your inbox Thursday. Yep, we're up today. You'll see us next Thursday, and thanks again. So have a good one.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Take care.